Part of what I would interpret the Maturidite position to be would be the following: that the greatest suffering and subjugation is not simply the physical suffering and subjugation. The greatest subjugation is to co-opt you into a mindset that normalizes your subjugation. Does anybody follow that? And what the Maturidites are arguing, in a sense, my interpretation of them, is that this persecution of blacks actually denied them entry into that mindset, so they could always see through it. Does everybody follow? Right? So that's their doctrine of wisdom. All right? Lastly, can I have 2 minutes? All right. All right, I apologize, I really do. I apologize. Traditionalists. And these guys are also known as Hanbalites. They don't get too much of a fair hearing in the West, because the West is overly obsessed with what I would consider to be this sort of almost, a cult of genius, a cult of reason. Reason is everything. The traditionalists don't privilege so much God's goodness, God's power, or God's wisdom, although they come close to that. But in a sense, God's character. They also, and by the way, when I said traditionalists here, I mean essentially Ibn Taymiyyah, as a shortcut. Essentially, they also subscribe to this notion of some version of kesb, because they also acknowledge free will, as we've discussed it. All right? But part of their genius is this, is that it is a mistake to freeze God into theological descriptions. God is not a described abstraction. God is real, all right? And if we want to talk about the relationship between God and the universe, particularly God and people, then we must talk about a relationship, right? Think about it in this way. They say that Warren Buffett and Bill Gates gave away something like $36 billion or something like that. Some of the whiz kids here. You remember that? 37 billion dollars. All right? Now, where I come from, that makes you a generous individual. All right? So as an attribute, I would say Bill Gates, generous. Warren Buffett, generous. Yet I doubt if I asked either of them for $100, they'd give it to me. Why? Because I have no relationship with them. And so what the traditionalists are arguing, in a sense, is that, yes, we have theological doctrines, all right, that deal with God in the abstract. But in terms of understanding things like human suffering, we have to go beyond the abstract to the actual relationship that human beings have with God. And that we cannot say God is X because something happened to me without looking at what? That reciprocal relationship, okay? I'll stop here, and I want to apologize very sincerely. This is my first time at CTS. I don't want to give the wrong impression. Who knows what might happen, right? Thank you very much. Jazakumullah khair.
We'll open up the floor for questions. Dr.
My question is for Dr. Umar Abd-Allah. First of all, thank you both for superb presentations. You talked about the mixed nature of human self, where khair and shar are both present. And even though in ultimate ontological sense you said that shar is not real and only khair is real. But to the extent that human self is itself being and non-being, it becomes very real for us in human situation. And the greatest problem comes in our capacity to recognize evil when it is there. In one person who was with Hitler, I'm forgetting the name, Shapiro or Shepard, he was tried in Nuremberg, and when he was asked that how an intelligent and educated person like you cannot see the evil which Hitler was perpetrating, and he said it's very hard to see the devil when his hand is on your shoulder. So we have this human capacity where generation after generations, we see genocides, we see Holocaust, we see Rwanda, we see Bosnia, we see terrorism, we see unjust war. Is there hope for humanity that one day it will mature and it will see evil clearly, or we are in this mess forever?
No, go ahead, please. Turn my mic off.
That's a very good question, and it's a very good comment. And I think that if you were to answer that question, it would probably be very good as well. Would you like to do that? Yeah, so let me see if I understand what you're saying. So what we are saying is that human beings are rooted in good. Their fitra, the way they're created, is good. And that evil is something that is, as it were, psychic. It works in the psychic domain. We believe in satanic influence and so forth. I think that we could say that there is always hope there because of the fact that when the Quran speaks of human beings as knowing evil, they say, it uses the word ilham, that God inspired it with knowledge of its depravity. And what the commentators say is that God gave all human beings knowledge of evil, because inspiration in Arabic is always positive, so that they know it and they recognize it. And therefore the prophets come also to give them the standards by which to judge. And I think that this is perhaps ultimately the human being coming to know themselves, attaining perfection, being shown the light, and being able to distinguish. And I would say that what is crucial in that is that people stand up for the truth and they make it very clear. And then it should be clear to all. Does that make sense to you, Dr. Jackson? Would you like to add anything?
Wow. I'm hesitant to say what I really think, and let me tell you why. I think that there's a real extent to which religious discourse in general suffers from the fact that the modern state, in a sense, exists in a posture that basically says to religion, show your utility to us, or we'll find something else for you to do. And that might not necessarily be the most direct path to the truth. Having said that much, I think that as a Muslim, the issue is not so much whether evil will always exist. The issue is whether or not my practice of Islam will endow me with the ability to respond to it in God-pleasing ways. And I think that it's very dangerous for religions to lapse into utopianism, because utopianism is just the sort of the chic side of extremism. And that's a lot of what we see in the world today. Religious communities that cannot deal with human frailty. Religious communities that cannot deal with less than the ideal. Not only that, I think that, again, this is not in praise of evil. That's not at all. I mean, that would be silly. But on some level, going back to the Maturidites, hikmah, I worry that religious communities think, wish, and theologize themselves into postures that ultimately relieve them of any need for God. That's it.
Assalamu alaikum. I apologize in advance for sort of taking a step back from what was said here tonight, but I've had a question that I was waiting until I had both of you here. Dr. Umar, you spoke in the first week about the importance of having a community of scholars for creating scholarship that is relevant and effective for a community, for an audience of that scholarship. And as a PhD student, I'm very curious to hear what both of you would think about the potential relationship between the academy and between traditional scholars as producing something functional and something that is relevant, and creating a community of scholars that can sort of talk across these academic lines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And your name is Will, yes, right? And I've called you Chris every time you've asked a question. So I give you my apologies for that. I hope you accept them. Yeah, and that's a really good question. Would you like to answer that question, Dr. Jackson?
Well, I mean, wow, no. Well, when you say how, was your question more about the how or if?
How we can be honest in an academic environment that may not allow us to do that. That's what I understand from it.
I think I'm asking more about the nature of the relationship between scholars in Western universities and scholars that we generally identify as quote-unquote Islamic scholars, scholars of fiqh, scholars of the Quran.
Well, you know, one of the things I think about is the following. I think that if you go back to somebody like Al-Ghazali, or you go back to somebody like Ibn Taymiyyah, now we have both sort of poles, or even somebody like Qarafi, whom I've studied more. I mean, Al-Qarafi wrote refutations, for example, of certain sects of Christianity and Judaism. And he read these scriptures in their languages. All right? Ghazali mastered Greek philosophy. So did Ibn Taymiyyah. And my point is that I think the curriculum of Muslim scholars that only focuses on sort of the traditional Muslim sciences need to be supplemented by curricula that also introduce the major ideas that are behind the way we live life, the way we think about life, we feel about life today. And I don't know if that can be done in any particular institution. I don't think Ghazali did it in any institution. Ibn Taymiyyah did it in any institution. He took it upon himself. Now, hopefully, once a number of us take it upon ourselves, we can institutionalize some of what we've learned in terms of what the proper curriculum should be. But I think that traditional scholarship needs a lot of supplement in order to render it effective in being able to address and take full advantage of the kinds of opportunities and challenges that modernity has presented.
I think that it is extremely important for us as Muslims to develop the means to flourish in the bastions of knowledge. And we have to be able to do that on our terms so that we can be honest to ourselves and what we believe in. And I think that there are many people that would welcome us and do in fact welcome us in that, like CTS, for example, in inviting us here. To me, this is a crucial matter because many of us, I think, would agree, and we would have lots of illustrations, that in the academy, secular humanism is often extremely intolerant. And that intolerance is not necessarily just in religious subjects or things that are not secular. It actually is even in the methodology of secular science and technology. And therefore, I think that this is something that needs to be discussed. It is being discussed. And great thinkers are writing about this. But I think that we have to find a way to open up a discourse of free speech in which everyone is able, as we say in Arabic, to put their own bucket in the well and to draw their own bucket out of the well. And we say in our political discourse in the United States, if you're not at the table, you will be on the menu. And if that's true in politics, I believe that in a way it's even more true in the academy. Because although the academy often may not have any clear relation, any clear connection with what goes on in other parts of society, it does indeed. And this is where also the issue of community of scholars comes in, because communities of scholars, they are the ones that popularize, they are the ones that explain it, they are the ones that make it clear. As I said before on the first lecture, Fox News is able to do the things that it does because it has a community of scholars. They may not be very scholarly, but the thing is that they buy into a particular discourse. They have a narrative, and they insist upon that over and over again. They work on how that is articulated so that on Fox News, to give the example that I gave the first night, you can actually raise the question, what school of Islamic law does Obama follow? And that will be taken seriously. It's not stand-up comedy. Okay, this is the effect of what we can call communities of scholars. And if you look at quantum theory, which we've talked about a little bit, quantum theory, who understands quantum theory? The physicists themselves don't really understand it. But the thing is that they popularize that, like Stephen Hawking has done in his book, The Grand Design. And that's not necessarily fair. That is a simplification. And there are good refutations of Hawking. But, we have got to be involved in that. And we want to be involved in that, I believe, for the sake of truth. And, as one great scholar says, scholarship is not always about truth. Academia is not always about truth. As Dr. Jackson says, the closest thing to modern slavery is to be on tenure track, right? And but I think that it's very important for us, and I would say, let us be involved in that, and let all of the voices in our community be involved in that. And we want everybody to be involved in that. America needs to talk. And, the people on the right need to speak to the people on the left. My family comes from red states, but they didn't used to be that way 100 years ago. So what's happened? And I've even seen myself in my own family, the way the cognitive frames have been wrenched apart. And they can no longer understand, and they're no longer open to discourse. This is very dangerous. This is not a healthy democracy, and that needs to be altered. And I think that everyone who contributes to that is doing a remarkable thing, a very valuable and worthy effort.
I do wish we'd set aside an entire evening just for this, just to have you ask questions. You want to come back next week?
What's the weather going to be like?
It's only getting nicer, that's all I can say. I'm Rabbi Rachel Mikva. I direct the Center for Jewish, Christian, and Islamic Studies here, and I'm professor of Jewish Studies. Did I finish that sentence? I direct the Center for Jewish, Christian, and Islamic Studies. Yes, I did. Sorry, it's been a long day. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I know some of you drove long distances to be here. There were also a great number of people who helped make this evening happen behind the scenes, and we're very grateful to all of you. I need to say just a couple things. First of all, for this amazing turnout, we apologize we ran out of everything. And a thank you to our scholars for their passion, for their erudition, for their commitment to have faith speak to critical issues in our world and in our lives. Dr. Sherman Jackson, who began and reiterated a couple times very persuasively exactly the reasons why we called this series Perspectives in Muslim Theology, in the plural. And to Dr. Umar Abd-Allah, who again has blessed us with his presence, and who also invoked the vital importance of standing up to challenge evils that sometimes obscure the essential goodness in our world. And so I mention this specifically because we continue to look for partners in our work to build bridges of cooperation and understanding over religious difference. And so if there is a scholar you would like to hear teach, an artist you would like to share, a conversation you think we should have, even a very difficult one, we would like your voice and your participation, your partnership in the work of the center. Just make sure that you're on the email list and you'll find out what we are planning, but then if you want to help plan, we would like that partnership too. We have one last event coming up in this academic year, and that is a fundraiser. If that's the way you want to partner, that's good too. It should be a lot of fun. We'll spend about 20 minutes talking about the work of the center, and then we're going to a taping of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. So if you're a big fan of WBEZ's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, it should be a spectacular evening. There are flyers about this event outside. But again, if you'd like to be partners in this work, we ask for your input. Send me an email, give me a call, and let me know how you think we can best advance this work. So I think that's all I needed to tell you. Thank you all very, very much.